My husband, Richard, secretly funneled $42,000 of our savings to his manipulative ex-wife. He thought I'd believe his story about a bad investment, a simple mistake from a man out of his depth. He didn't realize I'm a financial analyst, and I set a trap he never saw coming. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The silence in my home office was usually a comfort, a serene backdrop to the neat columns of numbers and predictable market trends that defined my world. As a financial analyst, I thrived on order, on the logical progression of cause and effect. But on that Tuesday afternoon, the silence was a heavy, suffocating blanket. It pressed in on me, amplifying the frantic, irregular rhythm of my own heart. I stared at the screen, at the online portal for our joint high-yield savings account, and felt a cold dread snake its way up my spine. The number was wrong. It was catastrophically, impossibly wrong. The balance displayed was $3,147.28. Just yesterday, it had been a little over $45,000. To be precise, it should have been $45,147.28. The missing amount was exactly $42,000. It was a number I knew by heart, a figure I had tracked with almost maternal devotion for the better part of a decade. That money wasn't for a vacation or a new car. It was the final, triumphant payment on our mortgage. It was the key to unlocking the front door of a home that would be entirely, unequivocally ours. It was our freedom, scheduled to be achieved just before my 50th birthday. My first thought was a technical error, a glitch in the bank system. It had to be. I refreshed the page, my hand trembling slightly on the mouse. The number remained unchanged. I logged out and logged back in, the familiar keystrokes feeling alien and clumsy. Still there. $3,147.28. A wave of nausea washed over me. This was not a glitch. $42,000 do not simply vanish into the digital ether. I clicked on the transaction history, my breath held tight in my chest. And there it was, dated 3 days ago, a single, colossal wire transfer. The description was vague, just a string of alphanumeric characters that meant nothing to me. But the amount was unmistakable. $42,000. I felt the blood drain from my face. My husband, Richard, and I were the only two people with access to this account. We had built this fund together, dollar by painstaking dollar. Or rather, I had built it. Richard was wonderful in many ways, charming, sociable, the life of every party, but financial discipline was not his strong suit. He was a marketing director, brilliant with slogans and campaigns, but hopeless with a budget. I was the one who set up the automatic transfers, who researched the best interest rates, who celebrated every $1,000 milestone. He knew how much this meant to me. He knew the dream of owning our home outright was the bedrock of my plans for our future. I reached for my phone, my fingers feeling thick and unresponsive. I dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, his voice breezy and cheerful. "Hey, honey, what's up? I'm just about to head into a meeting." I couldn't form the words. A lump had formed in my throat, thick and painful. "Richard," I managed, my voice a dry whisper. "The savings account, the mortgage account." There was a pause. It was only a second, but in that sliver of time, I felt the entire foundation of our 20-year marriage crack. The quality of the silence on his end of the line was different now. It was no longer the empty space between words. It was heavy, weighted with something he wasn't saying. "Oh," he said, and the single syllable was an admission of guilt. The cheerfulness was gone, replaced by a strained, artificial casualness. "Yeah, about that. I was going to tell you tonight. Something came up." "Something came up?" I repeated, the words sounding absurd. "Richard, $42,000 is gone. Where is it?" "Beck, listen, can we talk about this later? It's complicated. I'm walking into the boardroom right now." "No," I said, a surge of adrenaline cutting through the shock. "We're going to talk about this now. Where is our money?" He sighed, a long, theatrical sound of exasperation that set my teeth on edge. It was an investment, a stock tip. It was supposed to be a sure thing. I wanted to surprise you, to double it and pay off the house in one grand gesture. He took a shaky breath. It didn't pan out. I lost it, Rebecca. I'm so sorry. I lost it all. The lie was so audacious, so poorly constructed, it was almost insulting. Richard didn't know the first thing about high-risk stock trading. He called me to ask if his 401k was doing okay. He thought bull market had something to do with farming. The idea of him executing a sophisticated, high-stakes trade was laughable, but the tone of his voice wasn't laughable. It was the hollow, practiced sound of a man who had rehearsed his lines. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking in the silent room. The numbers on the screen seemed to mock me, a testament to a betrayal so profound it felt like a physical blow. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the trust, the shared dreams, the life I thought we were building together. He had taken our future and handed it to a lie. I looked around my office at the photos on my desk, Richard and me in Italy, smiling, the two of us on our wedding day, young and full of foolish optimism. A cold, clear certainty began to crystallize in the pit of my stomach. He was lying. And if he was lying about this, what else was he lying about? The story he'd concocted was a flimsy curtain, and I had a sudden, desperate need to see what he was hiding behind it. My grief and shock were beginning to curdle, hardening into something else, something sharp and focused. It was the feeling I got at work just before I uncovered a fatal flaw in a company's balance sheet, the quiet thrill of knowing the truth was there, waiting to be found beneath the layers of deception. He had stolen our security, our dream, and he had tried to cover it with an insultingly simple lie. The betrayal was worse than the loss itself. That evening, the house felt like a stranger's. Every familiar object, the worn armchair where Richard read the paper, the scuff mark on the wall we'd always meant to paint over, seemed to belong to a different life, a different woman. I moved through the rooms in a daze, the earlier adrenaline having given way to a deep, cavernous ache in my chest. I had made dinner out of sheer habit, a simple pasta dish that now sat cold on the stove. I couldn't imagine eating. When Richard came home, he walked in with the cautious, heavy-footed gait of a man entering a minefield. He had a bouquet of grocery store carnations in his hand, already slightly wilted. It was such a cliché, such a pathetic gesture of appeasement, that a bubble of bitter laughter almost escaped my lips. He placed them on the kitchen counter, avoiding my eyes. "I'm so sorry, Beck," he began, his voice low and practiced. "I was a fool, an arrogant, greedy fool. I wanted to be the hero, to give you everything." I just stared at him. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped, his usually confident expression replaced by a mask of pained contrition. It was a good performance. A few years ago, I would have believed it without question. I would have rushed to comfort him, to assure him that we would get through it together, that the money didn't matter. But something had fundamentally shifted in me that afternoon. I wasn't just his wife anymore. I was an analyst, and he was a flawed data set. "An investment," I said, my voice flat. "What was the company?" He flinched, not expecting a practical question. "Oh, it was a tech startup, a biotech firm. You wouldn't have heard of it. Very niche." "What's its ticker symbol?" I pressed, keeping my gaze level. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous tic I knew well. I don't remember off the top of my head. My broker handled it all. It was one of those high-risk, pre-IPO things. It all happened so fast." "Your broker?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "You don't have a broker, Richard. I manage our portfolio, every last share." Panic flickered in his eyes, a brief, uncontrolled flash of a man caught in the gears of his own lie. "It was a new guy," he stammered, recovering quickly. "A friend of a friend from the club. It was all very hush-hush. Look, can we not do this? I feel terrible enough as it is. I've failed you. I've failed us." He tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away. The touch of his skin felt like it would burn me. "You didn't fail us, Richard," I said, the words tasting like poison. "You stole from us." The accusation hung in the air between us, stark and ugly. He recoiled as if I had struck him. "That's not fair. My intentions were good. I was trying to do something for you, for our future." His performance was escalating, shifting from remorse to indignant self-defense. It was fascinating, in a horrifying way. He was doubling down, trying to bulldoze his way past my questions with a wall of manufactured emotion. He spoke of his shame, his regret, his deep-seated desire to provide for me in some grand, sweeping gesture that my meticulous, boring savings plan could never match. He painted a picture of himself as a romantic risk-taker who had simply been dealt a bad hand. I let him talk. I watched him pace the kitchen, gesticulating wildly, his voice filled with a convincing tremor. But all I could see were the inconsistencies, the gaping holes in his narrative. The wire transfer hadn't gone to a brokerage firm. The alphanumeric code in the description wasn't a stock symbol. A professional part of my brain, cold and detached. He was already cataloging these discrepancies. He finally wound down, ending on a note of exhausted appeal. "Please, Beck, can we just move past this? I'll make it up to you. I'll work double shifts. I'll sell my golf clubs. We'll get the money back. We just have to stick together." I gave him a small, tight-lipped nod. "I'm very tired, Richard. I'm going to bed." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the kitchen with his wilting flowers and his flimsy lies. I felt his eyes on my back, and I knew he was interpreting my retreat as acquiescence, as the first step toward the forgiveness he so clearly expected. He thought that with enough time and a few grand gestures, this would all blow over. He believed I was just his emotionally wounded wife, too heartbroken to see clearly. As I lay in our bed, the space between us a vast, frozen expanse, I stared into the darkness and let the cold fury settle in my bones. He thought this was over. He thought the worst part was the confession. He had no idea this was just the beginning. A thought, clear and sharp as a shard of glass, formed in my mind. It was a phrase that would become my mantra in the days to come. He had forgotten one crucial thing. He had forgotten who I was. He had forgotten that I don't just look at numbers. I find the story they tell. And I was going to find the real story behind our missing $42,000, no matter where it led. They had forgotten one crucial thing. The first few years of our marriage were a tightrope walk over a financial abyss. Richard had come into our union with a mountain of debt from his previous life, a consequence of his divorce from his first wife, Valerie. I knew about the debt, of course. He had been upfront about it, framing it as the cost of his freedom from a toxic, materialistic marriage. I, being young and in love, had accepted it as part of the package. I was a junior analyst then, meticulous and driven, and I saw his debt not as a burden, but as our first big project together. We lived on a shoestring budget for 7 years. I created spreadsheets that accounted for every penny. We packed our lunches, we drove a decade-old car, and our idea of a vacation was a weekend trip to a state park. I clipped coupons, negotiated bills, and took on freelance work in the evenings to accelerate our progress. Richard was supportive in his own way, always praising my discipline, calling me his financial wizard. He saw my sacrifices as a testament to my love for him, and in many ways they were. I was investing in us, in the future I was so certain we would have. I remembered the day we made the final payment on his consolidated loans. I had uncorked a bottle of cheap champagne, my eyes filled with tears of relief and pride. "We did it," I had whispered, holding my glass up to his. "We're free." He had smiled, but his eyes were distant. "You did it, Beck," he had corrected me. "I couldn't have done it without you." At the time, I took it as a compliment. Looking back now, I see it for what it was, an abdication of responsibility. I was the one who did the work. He was the one who reaped the benefits. It was shortly after that he began to talk about Valerie again. Not often, just in passing remarks. He'd mention how she was struggling to find herself after their divorce, how her new business ventures never seemed to pan out. He painted her as a tragic figure, a woman of big dreams and bad luck. "She just doesn't have your head for the practical stuff," he would say with a sigh, as if it were a charming, forgivable flaw. I met Valerie only a handful of times, mostly at obligatory functions involving his side of the family years ago. She was the kind of woman who seemed to glide through a room, wrapped in an aura of effortless, expensive elegance. Her hair was always perfectly styled, her clothes were designer, and her smile never quite reached her eyes. She called herself a lifestyle entrepreneur, a title so vague it was meaningless. When I once politely asked what her business entailed, she had waved a dismissive, manicured hand and said, "Oh, it's all about curating bespoke experiences." Very high concept. She had a way of looking at me, a subtle, pitying appraisal from head to toe that made me feel frumpy and pedestrian in my sensible shoes and department store dress. During one excruciating family brunch, she had made a pointed comment about our modest home. "It's so cozy," she'd said, drawing out the word as if it meant cramped. She then turned to Richard and added with a laugh, "Do you remember that villa we rented in Tuscany, darling? Now that was a house." Richard had just given an uncomfortable chuckle, leaving me to sit in a pool of humiliation. My unease about her had always simmered beneath the surface. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was an analyst's skepticism. Valerie's polished exterior and grand pronouncements didn't align with the struggling, tragic figure Richard described. She presented as a woman of means, yet he claimed she was perpetually on the brink of financial collapse. The data didn't add up. Now, with the $42,000 gone and Richard's flimsy story about a stock investment echoing in my ears, my old suspicions about Valerie came roaring back to life. The vague, high-concept business. The constant need for capital. The emotional leverage she still seemed to have over my husband. It was a perfect storm of motive and opportunity. The day after his confession, I called my best friend, Clara. She was a corporate lawyer, sharp, pragmatic, and the one person I could trust to see the situation with brutal clarity. We met for coffee at a small cafe far from our usual neighborhood haunts. I laid out the whole story, my voice low and steady, as I recounted the missing money and Richard's pathetic excuse. Clara listened without interrupting, her expression growing more severe with every word. When I finished, she took a long sip of her latte and set the cup down with a decisive click. "He's lying," she said. It wasn't a question. "I know," I replied, "but I need to prove it. He thinks I'm just going to cry for a week and then forgive him. He thinks I'll fall back into the role of the supportive wife who cleans up his messes." "So, what's your plan?" Clara asked, leaning forward. "Because I know you, Rebecca, you already have one." A small, cold smile touched my lips for the first time in days. "He's forgotten who he married," I said, echoing the thought that had sustained me through the night. "He married a woman who can read a balance sheet better than a novel, a woman who knows that money never just disappears, it always leaves a trail." "And the trail leads to Valerie," Clara finished for me, her eyes narrowing. That lifestyle entrepreneur nonsense has always sounded like a front for a professional freeloader. "Exactly," I confirmed. "Richard thinks he's covering for her, he thinks he's protecting her from his boring, practical wife, but he made a mistake. He used a wire transfer from a joint account. He might as well have sent up a flare." My hands were steady now, resting on the warm ceramic of my mug. The shock had burned away, leaving behind a core of pure, unadulterated resolve. I wasn't a victim in this story anymore. I was the auditor. And I was about to conduct the most important audit of my life. The shift from heartbroken wife to methodical investigator was not a conscious decision. It was an instinct. It was the muscle memory of my profession kicking in, providing a structure to contain the chaos of my emotions. Grieving could wait. First, I needed facts. My first step was to discreetly open a new bank account in my name only. I began rerouting my paycheck there, a quiet act of financial self-preservation. Then, I turned my attention to the crime itself, the wire transfer. Richard was sloppy. He assumed my emotional distress would blind me to the details, but the details were where I lived. I started with the alphanumeric code listed in the transfer description. It wasn't a ticker symbol, but it had the distinct pattern of a business registration number. A few hours of navigating, online corporate registries and public records databases confirmed my suspicion. The code corresponded to a newly formed limited liability company named Aura Wellness Ventures, LLC. The business address was a P.O. box in a neighboring state, a classic sign of a shell company designed to obscure ownership. The name, however, was the real clue. Aura. It was exactly the kind of vapid, trendy buzzword Valerie would use. A quick search for her online presence, her sparsely populated lifestyle blog, and her ostentatious social media profiles revealed a recent rebranding. She was no longer just curating experiences. She was now a holistic wellness visionary. Her posts were littered with hashtags like Aura, Bespoke Wellness, and Live Your Best Life, often accompanied by pictures of her at expensive spas or holding a designer handbag. The pieces were clicking into place with sickening speed. The next step was to formally link Valerie to the LLC. This was trickier. The company was registered by an agent, a common practice to maintain anonymity, but they, too, had made a mistake. The filing documents, which I paid a small fee to access, listed a single incorporator. The signature was a looping, stylized scrawl, but the printed name beneath it was Valerie Sinclair. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was the proof I needed. The money hadn't vanished in a bad stock trade. It had been wired directly into Richard's ex-wife's brand new, barely there company. My clever trap wasn't a single brilliant idea, but a patient, meticulous process of building an undeniable case. My leverage wasn't an emotional plea, it was a dossier. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was the quiet, wounded wife, allowing Richard to believe his performance of remorse was working. I let him. Make me dinner. I nodded numbly when he talked about his plans to make things right. I played the part of a woman too broken to fight back. But by night, after he was asleep, my home office became a war room. I hired a private investigator, an old contact of Clara's who specialized in financial fraud. He was expensive, but it was a worthy investment in my own future. His job was to follow Valerie, to document how the founder of a supposedly struggling wellness brand was spending her newfound capital. The reports that came back were even more damning than I had imagined. Valerie wasn't investing in her business. There was no product development, no marketing campaign, no office space. Instead, she was on a one-woman spending spree. The Pie provided a detailed report, complete with time-stamped photographs. Valerie leaving a luxury car dealership after putting a down payment on a new convertible. Valerie walking out of a high-end boutique with several large shopping bags. Valerie treating a group of friends to a lavish lunch at one of the city's most expensive restaurants. The Pie even managed to get a source close to Valerie's circle who confirmed she had been bragging about a major investment from a silent partner who still adored her. Each new piece of evidence was a fresh stab of betrayal, but it also fueled my resolve. I organized everything into a neat, leather-bound portfolio. I printed out the LLC registration documents, highlighting Valerie's name. I printed the bank statements, drawing a bold red arrow from the wire transfer out of our account to a corresponding deposit into the Aura Wellness Ventures account, which the Pie had managed to identify. I printed the Pie's reports and the glossy, full-color photos of Valerie's shopping trips. I created a timeline, a flowchart that showed the entire sordid journey of our money from our mortgage fund to Valerie's new convertible. The final piece of my trap was the setting. Richard's minor promotion at work provided the perfect cover. I announced one evening, with the first genuine-looking smile I had managed in weeks, that I wanted to throw him a dinner party to celebrate. Just a small one, I said innocently. At La Claremont, we'll invite your parents, your boss, and a few of our closest friends. You deserve it after everything. La Claremont was the most exclusive restaurant in the city, a place of hushed tones, crystal glasses, and astronomical prices. It was a place for celebrations and power plays. Richard was floored by my generosity. He saw it as the ultimate sign of my forgiveness, a public declaration that our marriage was back on track. "Are you sure, Beck?" he asked, his eyes shining with relief. That's incredible." "Of course," I said smoothly. "And you should invite Valerie, too. It's time we all moved on, acted like adults. It would be a wonderful gesture of peace, don't you think? He was hesitant at first, but the idea of being publicly celebrated and forgiven was too tempting. He agreed, promising to extend the invitation. He had no idea he was arranging the audience for his own execution. The trap was set. The evidence was compiled. The date was on the calendar. All I had to do now was wait. The week leading up to the dinner party was a masterclass in self-control. I played the role of the doting, forgiving wife to perfection. I discussed the menu with Richard, asked his opinion on the wine selection, and even feigned excitement about his promotion. He, in turn, blossomed under the attention. The guilt that had hunched his shoulders seemed to evaporate, replaced by his old, easy confidence. He was convinced he had weathered the storm. He saw my planning not as the intricate construction of a guillotine, but as a sign that our life was returning to normal. A few days before the event, I decided a small, preliminary confrontation was necessary. I needed to test the waters to see how he would react when presented with a single, undeniable fact. I chose my moment carefully. We were in the living room, a quiet Sunday afternoon. He was reading the sports section, a picture of domestic contentment. "Richard," I said, my voice calm and even. "I was looking over some old bank records the other day, just tidying up our digital files." "Oh," he said, not looking up from his paper. "Finding any hidden treasures?" "Of a sort," I replied. "I found the incorporation documents for a company called Aura Wellness Ventures, LLC. I thought the name sounded familiar." I let the name hang in the air. He slowly lowered the newspaper. His smile was gone. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he said, but his voice was a fraction too tight. "Really?" I feigned surprise. "That's odd, because the company was registered just one day before you made that investment. And the wire transfer from our savings account went directly to its business account." I kept my tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. I didn't mention Valerie's name, not yet. He stared at me, his face paling. The confident, charming man from moments before vanished, replaced by a cornered animal. "It must be a coincidence," he stammered. "Those tech startups have all sorts of weird holding companies. It's how they structure these deals." "Is it?" I pressed gently. "Because I did a little digging. It's not a holding company for a tech firm, it's a brand new entity, a wellness brand, it seems." His jaw tightened. He was beginning to see that the flimsy walls of his lie were crumbling. His first instinct was not to confess, but to attack. "What is this, Rebecca? An interrogation? I told you what happened. I made a mistake, I lost the money, and I'm trying to make it right. Why can't you just let it go? Why do you have to pick at it like this?" His voice rose, laced with manufactured outrage. "After everything I've been through, the shame, the guilt, and you're throwing these wild accusations at me. Maybe you wanted me to fail. Maybe you enjoy seeing me like this." It was a classic deflection, a desperate attempt to paint me as the villain, the untrusting, vindictive wife. It was meant to make me feel guilty, to put me on the defensive. But I wasn't the woman I was 3 weeks ago. His anger didn't intimidate me, it confirmed my theories. His poorly executed threats and obvious lies were the flailing of a man who knew he was caught. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't cry. I simply held his gaze, my expression unreadable. "It's just a question, Richard," I said softly. "You're right, I'm sure it's nothing. I'm just being silly." I stood up and walked out of the room, leaving him sitting amidst the scattered sections of the newspaper. I could feel his confused, frightened stare on my back. My strategic retreat was a crucial part of the plan. I had planted a seed of doubt not in my own mind, but in his. I had shown him a single card from my hand, and his panicked, aggressive reaction told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't just a liar, he was a coward. He wouldn't confess or try to fix things. He would simply double down, hoping his bluster would see him through. He had no idea that the portfolio sitting in my locked desk drawer contained the entire deck. The small confrontation had shattered his perception of his own security, but he still couldn't fathom the true extent of what I knew. He thought I had found a loose thread. He didn't realize I had already unraveled his entire world. The dinner at Le Claremont was no longer just a plan for revenge. It was an inevitability. Richard's panic after our Sunday confrontation was palpable. He became overly attentive, constantly trying to gauge my mood, showering me with hollow compliments and questions about the upcoming dinner. He was like a man checking the sky for rain, knowing a storm was coming but desperately hoping it would pass. He even brought up Valerie, attempting a clumsy bit of preemptive damage control. "I spoke to Valerie, by the way," he mentioned casually one evening while we were washing dishes. "She's so excited for the dinner. It's been tough for her, you know. Her new business is taking a while to get off the ground. She's pouring everything she has into it." "Is that so?" I replied, handing him a wet plate without meeting his eyes. "Yeah," he continued, scrubbing the plate with unnecessary vigor. "She sees this dinner as a great networking opportunity. To meet my boss, maybe find some investors. I hope you'll be nice to her, Beck. She's really trying to turn her life around." He was building a narrative, reinforcing the image of Valerie as a struggling entrepreneur who deserved our sympathy, not our suspicion. He was trying to cast her in a role that would make my evidence seem cruel and out of context. It was a pathetic, transparent maneuver. Meanwhile, my final preparations were falling into place. The private investigator delivered his last report, and it contained the final, irrefutable piece of proof. He had tracked Valerie to a travel agency where she had paid in cash for 2 first-class, non-refundable tickets to Bali, scheduled to depart the day after our dinner party. She wasn't just spending my money, she was planning her escape. The report included a photograph of the itinerary, clearly showing her name. The second ticket was booked under the name R. Sinclair, my Richard. The sight of that document extinguished the last embers of doubt or sentimentality I might have had. This wasn't just a case of financial support for a needy ex-wife. This was a coordinated heist. They had planned to take our life savings and start a new life together, leaving me behind with an empty bank account and a paid-off mortgage that was no longer paid off. The sheer audacity of it left me breathless. Armed with this new, devastating information, I knew I had to have one last conversation with Richard. Not to save our marriage, that was already a ghost, but to give him one final chance to tell the truth, to see if there was any sliver of the man I married left inside him. I found him in his study, going over some notes for a presentation. I closed the door behind me and handed him the pie's photograph of the flight itinerary. "What's this?" he asked, taking the paper with a frown. I watched his face as he read it. The color drained away, leaving behind a sickly, gray pallor. His eyes darted from the names on the tickets to my face, searching for an explanation, an escape route. He found none. My expression was as hard and unyielding as granite. "Bali," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "It sounds lovely this time of year." He dropped the paper on his desk as if it were on fire. "This isn't what it looks like," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "It was her idea, a fantasy. She booked them as a manifestation tool. It's part of her wellness brand nonsense. I wasn't actually going to go." "So you gave her $42,000 for a manifestation tool?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. He flinched. For a moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, shame, perhaps, or true fear. The carefully constructed walls of his deception were gone, and he was exposed and pathetic. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He knew there was no lie left that could possibly cover this. But even then, cornered with undeniable proof of a planned escape with his ex-wife, funded by money stolen from me, he still tried to defend her. "You don't understand Valerie," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "She's not a bad person. She's just lost. She gets these grand ideas and she needs support. She's fragile. This will destroy her." His loyalty, even at the 11th hour, was not to me. It was to her. He was more concerned with protecting the architect of our ruin than with the wife he had betrayed. That was the moment the spell of our 20 years together was irrevocably broken. I saw him not as my husband, but as a weak, foolish man, completely ensnared by a woman who was playing him for every penny he had. "Don't worry, Richard," I said, my voice turning icy. I have no intention of destroying her. I'm simply going to present the facts. The truth has a way of destroying things all on its own. I picked up the itinerary from his desk, folded it neatly, and placed it back in my folder. I'll see you at dinner tomorrow, I said. Don't be late, and please make sure Valerie comes. I'd hate for her to miss the celebration. I walked out, leaving him to stare at the wreckage of his future. The case was closed. All that remained was the sentencing. Le Claremont was everything I remembered. A symphony of hushed conversations, clinking silverware, and the soft glow of candlelight on starched white tablecloths. We were seated at a large, round table in a semi-private alcove, creating the perfect stage. Richard's parents, beaming with pride, sat on one side. His boss, a portly and important man named Mr. Abernathy, sat on the other, accompanied by his wife. My friend Clara was there, her presence a silent, solid source of strength. And then there was Valerie. She had arrived looking radiant, dressed in a silk gown the color of champagne that had likely been purchased with my mortgage money. She greeted me with a theatrical air kiss, her smile a glittering, predatory thing. "Rebecca, darling," she cooed. "This is so brave of you. Richard told me how you two hit a little rough patch, but it's wonderful to see you bouncing back so beautifully." The condescension was so thick I could have cut it with a dinner knife. Richard, for his part, was a wreck. He was pale and jittery, spilling a bit of water as he reached for his glass. He kept shooting me desperate, pleading looks, which I ignored with serene detachment. The first part of the dinner proceeded as planned. We made small talk. Richard's father told a long, rambling story. Mr. Abernathy praised Richard's work on a recent campaign. I played the part of the proud, supportive wife, smiling and nodding in all the right places. Valerie dominated the conversation, talking loudly about her wellness brand and the importance of manifesting abundance. At one point, she had the gall to look directly at me and say, "You see, Rebecca, you can't be afraid to take big risks to get what you want in life. A little savings account is safe, but it will never buy you freedom." Clara nearly choked on her breadstick. I simply gave Valerie a placid smile. "That's a fascinating perspective," I said. Finally, after the main courses were cleared, the moment arrived. I stood up, tapping my water glass gently with a spoon. "If I could have everyone's attention for a moment," I said, my voice clear and steady. A hush fell over the table. Richard froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. "I know we're here to celebrate Richard's promotion, and I am so very proud of him," I began, looking around the table at our captive audience. "But I have another small celeb ration to announce tonight. You see, I recently solved a rather complex financial mystery, and I thought I'd share my findings." I reached down and placed my leather-bound portfolio on the table with a soft thud. I opened it and took out the first document. As some of you know, Richard and I were just about to pay off our mortgage. The final payment was going to be $42,000. I paused, letting the number sink in. Unfortunately, a few weeks ago, that exact amount disappeared from our savings account. Richard's mother gasped. Mr. Abernathy leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Richard told me he lost it in a high-risk stock investment," I continued, my voice calm and professorial. "A noble, if foolish, attempt to surprise me, but as a financial analyst, the story didn't quite add up. So I did what I do best. I followed the money." I slid a copy of the wire transfer statement across the table to Mr. Abernathy. The money wasn't transferred to a brokerage firm. It was sent to a shell company formed just one day prior. A company called Aura Wellness Ventures, LLC. Valerie's smile faltered. Her glass stopped midway to her lips. "And who is the sole owner of this aspiring company?" I asked rhetorically, my eyes locking onto hers. I slid another document onto the table, the LLC registration, with her name circled in red. "Why, it's none other than Valerie Sinclair." A collective gasp went around the table. Richard looked like he was about to be physically ill. Valerie's face was a mask of disbelief. "Oh, but the story doesn't end there," I said, my voice gaining strength. "One might assume this was a legitimate investment in a friend's business, but I was curious to see how this capital was being spent. I proceeded to place the pie's photographs on the table one by one, like a dealer laying out a winning hand. Here is Valerie putting a down payment on a new convertible. Here she is on a shopping spree at Chanel. And here she is enjoying a spa day that cost more than our monthly grocery bill. Valerie shot to her feet. This is an outrage. These are lies. Rebecca is just a jealous, bitter woman. Am I asked softly, and then I played my final card. I took out the photograph of the Bali flight itinerary and placed it directly in front of Richard's father. Then perhaps you can explain this. 2 first-class, non-refundable tickets to Bali, departing tomorrow, booked for Valerie Sinclair and R. Sinclair. A final, grand escape funded by the last of our life savings. The silence that followed was absolute. Richard's mother was weeping softly. His father was staring at him with an expression of profound disappointment. Mr. Abernathy looked at Richard with utter contempt. Valerie, seeing the game was up, sputtered, "Richard, say something. Tell them she's crazy." But Richard was broken. He just sat there, staring at his empty plate, unable to meet anyone's eyes. And then the most unexpected thing happened. Richard's mother, a quiet, gentle woman I'd always known to be utterly non-confrontational, slowly stood up. She looked at Valerie, her eyes filled with a cold fire I had never seen before. She picked up her full glass of ice water, walked calmly around the table, and with a steady hand, poured the entire contents over Valerie's perfectly styled hair. Ice cubes and water cascaded down Valerie's face and onto her expensive silk dress. She let out a shriek of fury and shock. The entire restaurant turned to stare. "That," Richard's mother said, her voice trembling with rage, "is for my daughter-in-law." It was a moment of pure, triumphant chaos. Valerie, sputtering and soaked, grabbed her purse and fled the restaurant, leaving a trail of water and humiliation in her wake. The spell was broken. The truth was out, and my victory was absolute. In the immediate aftermath of the dinner, the implosion of Richard's life was swift and total. Mr. Abernathy, a man who valued integrity and reputation above all else, fired him the next morning. The official reason was conduct unbecoming of a director, but the message was clear. His career in the city's tight-knit marketing community was over. His parents, deeply ashamed, cut off all contact, refusing to even take his calls. They called me, however, offering their unwavering support and apologizing profusely for their son's weakness and deceit. I filed for divorce the day after the dinner party. With Clara by my side, the legal proceedings were straightforward. The portfolio of evidence I had compiled was so thorough and irrefutable that Richard's lawyer advised him not to contest a single point. My proof of financial infidelity and fraud, or dissipation of marital assets, as the court called it, meant the settlement was heavily skewed in my favor. I got the house, the entirety of my own retirement accounts, and a court order requiring Richard to repay the stolen $42,000 with interest. Valerie's downfall was just as complete, without Richard's income too. Exploit, her lavish lifestyle, came to a screeching halt. The new convertible was repossessed within a month. I had Clara send a formal legal notice to her P.O. box, informing her that we would be pursuing civil action to reclaim the funds she had fraudulently obtained if Richard failed to pay. The threat was enough. Her Aura Wellness Ventures vanished from the internet, and from what I heard through the grapevine, she ended up moving back in with her sister in another state, her dreams of being a lifestyle guru in tatters. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork and quiet adjustment. The house felt vast and empty at first, the silence no longer comforting but echoing with the ghost of a shared life. There were moments of profound sadness, not for the man Richard had become, but for the man I thought he was, and for the future I had so meticulously planned that had turned out to be a fiction. But slowly, surely, a new feeling began to take its place, a profound sense of peace. One crisp autumn afternoon, about 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I received the first repayment check from Richard. It wasn't for the full amount, just the first court-ordered installment, garnished from his wages at a new, much lower-paying job he'd found in a different city. I took that check, combined it with my own savings that I had been fiercely rebuilding, and I drove to the bank. I walked up to the teller and made the final payment on my mortgage. There was no champagne this time, no grand celebration, just a quiet, deeply personal sense of triumph. I walked out of the bank and into the bright sunshine, holding the paid-in-full receipt in my hand. I went home, and for the first time, it felt entirely mine. Every floorboard, every window, every blade of grass in the yard was a testament not to us, but to me, to my resilience, my hard work, and my refusal to be a victim. That evening, Clara came over with a bottle of very good, very expensive champagne. We sat on my back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. "To Rebecca," she said, raising her glass, "the best financial analyst and the toughest woman I know." "To freedom," I replied, clinking my glass against hers. The road ahead was my own to chart. I had my career, my home, and my self-respect intact. The betrayal had left a scar, but it was a scar that served as a reminder of my own strength. Richard and Valerie had tried to steal my future, but they had only succeeded in stealing from each other. They had forgotten that my greatest asset wasn't my money, it was my mind. And in the end, it was an asset they simply couldn't afford.